When the corridors of St. Ives University were silent at 11 p.m., save for the rhythmic squeak-squeak of Samuel Banks' mop bucket and the scratching of forbidden chalk in Lecture Hall 304. Outside, a November blizzard battered the ancient brick walls, coating the campus in a thick blanket of white silence. But inside the mathematics department, the air was warm, heavy with the scent of lemon wax, old mahogany, and the lingering prestige of centuries of academic excellence. Samuel Banks paused to wipe sweat from his forehead with a rough paper towel. At 52, the night shift felt longer than it used to. His knees popped with every step, and his back carried the ache of a lifetime of invisible labor. But he didn't complain. He adjusted his gray coveralls, checked the hallway for security guards, and pushed his cart toward the open door of the lecture hall. He wasn't just cleaning floors tonight. He was guarding a secret. Inside the cavernous room, 12-year-old Leo Banks stood on a wooden chair, his sneakers leaving faint, dusty prints on the seat. He looked far too small for the grand setting. His gray hoodie, a hand-me-down from the local church drive, swallowed his thin frame, the sleeves bunching up at his wrists. But Leo wasn't looking at his clothes. His eyes, magnified slightly by scratched plastic glasses, were locked on the massive slate blackboard that dominated the front wall. Covering the board was the Stirling paradox, a labyrinth of calculus and theoretical variables that had stumped the world's brightest minds for 12 years. Professor Arthur Stirling had left it there like a trophy, a testament to a problem only he understood but could not solve. To the PhD candidates, it was a fortress. But to Leo, who spent his nights reading discarded textbooks in the supply closet, it didn't look like a fortress. It looked like a sentence with a grammatical error. "It's not a wall," Leo whispered to the empty room, his breath fogging slightly in the vast space. "It's a door." He reached up. The piece of chalk in his hand felt heavy, illicit. He knew he shouldn't be touching it. His father had told him 1,000 times, "We are ghosts here, Leo. We clean, we don't touch." But the numbers were calling to him. The equation assumed x was a constant, a fixed point in space. Leo saw the pattern differently. It had to move. It had to breathe. Scritch. Scratch. The sound was sharp in the quiet room. Leo drew a line through the static variable and replaced it with a dynamic curve. He stepped back, chalk dust coating his fingertips. For the first time, the equation flowed. It made sense. It was beautiful. Suddenly, the heavy double doors at the back of the hall swung open. Laughter spilled into the room loud, confident, and smelling of expensive red wine. Professor Arthur Stirling strode in, flanked by 2 junior colleagues. They had likely just come from a faculty dinner, their cheeks flushed from heat and accolades. Stirling, a man who wore 3-piece suits as armor and treated arrogance as a virtue, stopped dead in his tracks. The laughter died instantly. Samuel froze near the door, gripping his mop handle until his knuckles turned white. Leo scrambled down from the chair, hiding the chalk behind his back, shrinking into his hoodie. "What?" Stirling's voice boomed, echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "Is the meaning of this?" He didn't look at the math. He didn't glance at the elegant correction that unraveled a decade of confusion. He only saw a janitor's child standing on university furniture. He saw dust on his pristine floor. He saw an intrusion. Stirling marched to the podium, his expensive wool coat swaying with his angry strides. He snatched the felt eraser from the tray. With a theatrical, disgusted sweep of his arm, he wiped the board clean. Swish. Swish. Leo watched in horror. Years of silent observation, the spark of genius, the truth, all of it disappeared into a cloud of white dust that settled on the professor's polished shoes. It was erased as if it had never mattered. As if he had never mattered. Stirling dropped the eraser. It hit the floor with a hollow thud. He turned to Samuel, his eyes cold and devoid of any recognition of the man who had cleaned his office for 8 years. Stirling dusted the chalk from his expensive gloves and sneered, "This is an Ivy League institution, Mr. Banks, not a daycare. Stick to the floors." Humiliation has a specific taste. It tastes like the cold bologna sandwiches Samuel and Leo ate in the supply closet that night, surrounded by the smell of bleach and damp mop heads. It was a sharp, metallic tang that sat heavy in the stomach, harder to swallow than the dry bread. They ate in silence, the hum of the university's heating system vibrating through the walls, heat that was meant for the students and professors in the bright lecture halls, not for the ghosts in the basement. Samuel watched his son pick at the crust. The boy hadn't spoken since they left the lecture hall, his small shoulders hunched under the weight of Sterling's words. But Leo wasn't crying. His eyes were wide, staring at a stain on the concrete floor, his mind miles away. Finally, he whispered, barely audible over the hum of the furnace, "He's treating X as a constant, Dad. It has to change. If it doesn't change, the box stays closed forever." Samuel sighed, crushing his napkin. "Head up, son. You know what we talked about. Some people, they look at us and they don't see people. They see uniforms. But that doesn't mean you're wrong." The next morning, the campus was alive with the bustle of the elite. Students in expensive scarves rushed to class, clutching lattes that cost more than Samuel's hourly wage. Samuel pushed his trash cart against the biting wind, his determination hardening. He couldn't let it go. He spotted a graduate student he knew, a kind-faced young man who sometimes said hello. Samuel parked his cart and cleared his throat. "Excuse me, sir," Samuel said, pulling his cap down nervously. "About the Sterling paradox? My boy, he was looking at it last night. He thinks there's an error in the variable assumption." The student paused, blinking. Then a pitying smile stretched across his face, the kind one gives to a confused child. "That's cute, Sam. Really. It's nice he takes an interest. But Professor Sterling has been working on that since before your son was born. Maybe stick to the recycling, yeah. Leave the calculus to the department." The rejection stung worse than the cold. Samuel nodded slowly and moved on. He didn't see Leo, who was waiting by a bench near the quad to help swap out the heavy trash bags. Leo had left his battered spiral notebook open on the wood slats while he dragged a bag toward the cart. The pages fluttered in the wind, revealing a chaotic mess of diagram circles, triangles, and a bold, dark line cutting through a complex equation. Dr. Claire Hughes, a visiting professor from MIT known for her sharp wit and lack of patience for academic politics, was walking briskly toward the faculty building. She glanced at the bench, intending to ignore the litter. But the geometry caught her eye. She stopped. She took a step back. It wasn't just doodles. It was a reimagining of the boundary conditions Sterling had been lecturing about for years. "My God," she whispered, adjusting her glasses. The variable wasn't fixed. The child, whoever owned this beat-up notebook, had opened the box. She looked around, but saw only a janitor and a small boy in a hoodie wrestling with a dumpster in the distance. She didn't make the connection. Thinking quickly, she pulled out her phone, snapped a high-resolution photo of the open page, and hurried away before the wind could turn the leaf. By lunchtime, whispers were snaking through the hallowed halls of St. Ives. A rumor, started perhaps by a student who overheard a janitor or a cleaner who saw a notebook, began to circulate. "The janitor's kid says Sterling is wrong." It was the kind of gossip that academia thrived on: absurd, funny, and slightly cruel. Professor Sterling heard it in the faculty lounge while pouring his third cup of artisan coffee. A junior colleague chuckled. "Can you imagine, Arthur? They say the cleaning staff is peer-reviewing your work now." The laughter that followed was light, but to Sterling, it sounded like thunder. His face flushed a deep, violent red. It wasn't the math that bothered him. He didn't believe for a second he was wrong. It was the audacity. The idea that the help dared to have an opinion on his life's work was an itch he couldn't scratch. His ego, fragile as fine china, cracked. He slammed his cup down, shattering the saucer and silencing the room. The junior professors froze. Sterling turned, his eyes gleaming with a malicious idea. If they wanted a joke, he would give them a punchline. He would invite the boy. He would let the world see the difference between a prodigy and a pretender. Sterling stormed into the faculty lounge, announcing loudly, "It seems we need a public demonstration. I'm inviting the boy to the symposium to teach him and his father a lesson in reality." The invitation arrived on thick, cream-colored paper, looking like an honor but feeling like a summons to an execution. It had been slid under the door of the facility's break room, the heavy cardstock embossed with the St. Ives University crest in gold foil. To anyone else, it was a ticket to the academic event of the season, the annual pre-Thanksgiving Mathematics Symposium. To Samuel and Leo Banks, it was a gauntlet thrown down by a man who held their livelihood in his manicured hands. 3 days, Samuel muttered, running his rough thumb over the raised gold letters. Thanksgiving Eve. He wants to do this right before the holiday, when the whole donor board is watching. Leo sat on a stack of cardboard boxes, hugging his knees. The excitement of discovery had faded, replaced by a cold, gnawing dread. I can't go, Dad, he whispered, staring at his sneakers. I don't have a suit. I don't speak like them. They're going to laugh. Professor Sterling said it's a lesson. That means he knows I'm going to fail. Samuel looked at his son, really looked at him. He saw the fear that had been passed down through generations, the instinct to stay small, to stay invisible, to survive. Slowly, Samuel knelt on the concrete floor until he was eye level with the boy. He placed his callous hands on Leo's shoulders. Look at me, Leo, Samuel said, his voice low and fierce. They see a janitor's son. They see a hoodie. They see a charity case. But math? Math doesn't have eyes. Math doesn't care about your zip code or what your daddy does for a living. You show them a mathematician, Leo. You don't do it for them. You do it for the truth you found on that board. Leo took a shaky breath and nodded. Okay. For the truth. The next 48 hours were a blur of caffeine and chalk dust inside the janitor's supply closet, Leo's makeshift laboratory. While the rest of the campus prepared for the holiday break, Leo worked amidst the smell of ammonia and damp mops. He didn't have the sophisticated software the professors used. Instead, he had index cards and cheap markers. He realized he couldn't beat Sterling at his own game of complex calculus notation. He had to change the language. He translated the equations into geometry: circles, squares, intersecting lines. He turned the abstract into the visual, simplifying the Sterling paradox so that even a child or an arrogant professor couldn't deny it. On the afternoon of the symposium, the university auditorium was unlocked for sound checks. Samuel had arranged for them to be on the cleaning rotation for that area, so Leo could get a feel for the stage. The room was massive, a cavern of red velvet seats that seemed to stare judgmentally at the empty podium. Leo set his backpack down on a table in the prep room, just off stage. Inside was everything: his spiral notebook with the original proofs, his stack of color-coded index cards, and a cheap blue USB drive containing a backup digital summary he'd made on the library computer. I need water, Leo said, his throat dry from nerves. Go, Samuel said, checking his watch. I'll finish sweeping the aisle. Be quick. Leo ran to the water fountain down the hall. The corridor was empty, but he felt a strange prickle on the back of his neck, the sensation of being watched. He hurried back, wiping his mouth with his sleeve. When he entered the prep room, the air felt different. Still. Too still. He walked to the table. His backpack, which he had left zipped tight, was gaping open like a wounded mouth. Leo's heart hammered against his ribs. He grabbed the bag and dumped it upside down. Lint and gum wrappers fell out. Nothing else. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced his chest. He dropped to his knees, frantically searching under the table. In the corner, near the trash can, he found the blue USB drive. It had been stomped on, the plastic casing shattered, the memory chip inside cracked in half. Samuel ran in, hearing the commotion. He stopped in the doorway, seeing the empty bag and the destruction. He didn't need to ask who. The cruelty had a signature. Leo looked up at his father, eyes filling with tears, holding the broken plastic of his USB drive. Dad, they took everything. I have nothing to show them. 1,000 skeptical eyes weighed heavy on the small boy in the oversized hoodie as he walked onto the stage, armed with nothing but a piece of white chalk and his father's desperate promise. The grand auditorium of St. Ives University was a terrifying cavern of velvet and judgment. The stage lights were blinding, hot white spots that cut Leo off from the darkness where his father stood watching. He felt smaller than he had ever felt in the corridors he helped clean. Professor Sterling stood at the polished oak podium, looking down at Leo like a king examining a peasant. He adjusted the microphone, his voice dripping with faux sympathy that echoed through the massive speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, it seems our young guest has suffered a misfortune. His prepared materials have tragically gone missing. A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. Sterling smiled, a shark-like baring of teeth. Perhaps we should reschedule for when he is better prepared? Or perhaps this is a lesson that rigorous mathematics requires more than just youthful enthusiasm. Leo gripped the chalk until his knuckles turned white. He wanted to run. He wanted to hide back in the supply closet. But then his father's voice echoed in his memory, clearer than the professor's amplified taunts. Truth doesn't need a PowerPoint. It just needs to be seen. Leo ignored the microphone. He ignored the laughter. He walked past the high-tech digital projection screen that Sterling had set up and stopped in front of the massive, old-fashioned rolling blackboard at the rear of the stage. It was a relic, much like the problem he was about to solve. He reached up. Scritch. The sound was sharp and jarring, cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. Leo didn't write numbers. He didn't write the complex integrals that Sterling used to confuse his students. Instead, he drew a square. Then, inside the square, a perfect circle. The Sterling paradox, Leo said, his voice trembling at first, then gaining strength as he focused solely on the white lines, assumes that the variable x is trapped inside the box. He drew a jagged line hitting the wall of the square and bouncing back. You say it bounces. You say it's infinite chaos. Leo looked out at the blinding lights, imagining he was just talking to his dad. But x isn't a particle. It's a wave. With a swift, confident stroke, Leo drew a curve that didn't bounce off the square's wall but passed right through it, transforming into a larger wave on the outside. He began to write the geometric proof rapidly, his hand moving in a blur. He translated the impossible calculus into simple geometry. He showed that the wall wasn't a barrier. It was a lens. The chaos inside the box wasn't a paradox. It was just a refraction pattern. Professor Sterling asks you to solve the box, Leo announced, stepping back, his face dusted with chalk but his eyes blazing. But the problem isn't the box. It's the space outside it. He put down the chalk. The diagram on the board was simple, elegant, and devastatingly clear. The solution didn't require 12 years of study. It required looking at the world without the blinders of ego. A heavy silence fell over the auditorium. It was the kind of silence that happens when a magic trick is revealed to be real magic. 1,000 mathematicians were processing the fact that a 12-year-old had just dismantled a decade of academic dogma with a circle and a square. Then, in the front row, Dr. Claire Hughes stood up. She didn't say a word. She just started to clap. Clap, clap, clap. It was a slow, rhythmic sound that cut the tension. Then another professor stood. Then a student. Within 10 seconds, the sound was a roar. The entire auditorium rose to its feet, a wave of thunderous applause washing over the small boy in the gray hoodie. Sterling rushed to the microphone, his face pale, shouting over the applause, "Order! This is a parlor trick. Visual geometry is not rigorous proof. This proves nothing. Victory in mathematics is sweet, but justice cold. Hard justice is the main course everyone was waiting for." The applause that had shaken the rafters began to fade, replaced by a confused murmur as Professor Sterling refused to yield the podium. He gripped the microphone stand like a weapon, his face slick with sweat, his eyes darting wildly between the calm boy on the stage and the judging crowd. "You are being deceived," Sterling bellowed, his voice cracking with desperation. This child is a prop. He lacks the fundamental academic foundation to understand the variables he is drawing. He likely memorized this from a textbook or stole the concept from a graduate student's trash. It is plagiarism, plain and simple. A visual trick does not equal a mathematical proof. Leo took a step back, the joy of his discovery withering under the assault. He looked for his father in the shadows, needing an anchor. But before Samuel could step forward, Dr. Claire Hughes walked up the stairs to the stage. She moved with the precise, dangerous grace of a predator who has cornered its prey. She didn't look at Leo. She looked straight at Sterling. "Actually, Arthur," she said, her voice amplified clearly by the lapel mic she had worn for her own presentation, "you didn't think it was plagiarism 14 months ago. You thought it was an inconvenience." Sterling froze, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. "Claire, this is neither the time nor the—" "It is exactly the time," she cut him off. She pulled a cable from the lectern and plugged it into her slim laptop. The massive screen behind them flickered. The image of Leo's elegant geometry vanished, replaced by the stark, bright interface of an email inbox. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. Projected 20 feet high was an email chain, magnified for even the back row to see. From Professor Arthur Sterling to Dr. J. Reynolds, Yale. Date: September 14, 2023. Subject: The paradox is flawed. Dr. Hughes pointed to the highlighted text. "Read it," she commanded the room. The words were undeniable. "The paradox is flawed," Sterling had written in black and white. "The variable boundary condition is porous, just as the simulation suggested. However, if this gets out now, the publisher pulls the contract for the limits of possibility. We must bury this analysis until the book is released and the advance is secured." The silence in the auditorium was absolute. It wasn't just an error. It wasn't just arrogance. It was a lie. A calculated million-dollar lie designed to protect a reputation at the expense of the truth. Sterling had known the problem was solvable for over a year. He had looked at a 12-year-old boy, known the boy was right, and tried to destroy him publicly to save a book deal. The dean of the university, a gray-haired man known for his stoicism, walked slowly onto the stage. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. He simply placed a hand on the microphone and turned it away from Sterling. "Professor," he said quietly, "please step away from the podium. I believe your tenure has just expired." As security escorted a sputtering Professor Sterling off the stage, Leo looked across the room at his father. For the first time in his life, Samuel Banks wasn't invisible, he was the proudest man on earth. The snow outside St. Ives University was still biting cold, but the chill inside the Banks family's life had finally thawed forever. For the first time in 8 years, Samuel Banks walked through the main campus gates not at 10 p.m. for the night shift, but at 10 a.m., with the winter sun sparkling on the fresh drifts. The atmosphere on campus had shifted. The local radio station, usually reserved for classical music and lecture rebroadcasts, was playing a clip of Leo's presentation between holiday tunes. The headline "Janitor's Son Cracks the Code" was plastered on the front page of the Massachusetts Gazette inside every newspaper box they passed. But Samuel wasn't looking at the papers. He was looking at his son, walking beside him with his head held high, no longer hiding inside his hoodie. They were summoned to the dean's office, a room Samuel had cleaned 1,000 times but never sat in. This time, the dean stood up to shake his hand. "Mr. Banks," the dean said, gesturing to the leather chair, usually reserved for donors. "The university owes you a debt of gratitude. Not just for your son's brilliance, but for your dignity during unfortunate events." He slid a contract across the mahogany desk. "Professor Sterling's resignation has opened up some budget. We'd like to offer you the position of head of facilities. Day shift. Full benefits. And for Leo, a full scholarship to the mathematics program, whenever he is ready to begin." Samuel looked at the contract. The salary was triple what he made mopping floors. He looked at Leo, who grinned and kicked his feet. "Day shift?" Samuel asked, his voice thick with emotion. "You mean I can have dinner with my boy?" "Every night, Mr. Banks," the dean smiled. As they walked out of the administration building, the heavy oak doors swung open. The stern-faced security guard, the one who used to check Samuel's bag every night to make sure he hadn't stolen toilet paper, stepped into their path. Samuel instinctively reached for his ID badge, but the guard shook his head. He pulled a small notepad and a pen from his pocket. "Hey, kid," the guard grunted, looking awkward. "My nephew, he saw you on the news. He wants to be a math guy now. Can you sign this?" Leo blinked, then took the pen. He signed his name carefully, right next to a small drawing of a circle inside a square. The guard nodded respectfully at Samuel man to man, not guard to janitor, and held the door open for them. Thanksgiving dinner wasn't held in the supply closet. It was at Louie's Diner down on Main Street, a place that smelled of roasting turkey, sage stuffing, and hot apple pie. They sat in a red vinyl booth by the window, watching the snow fall gently on the streetlights. The table was full: turkey, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, and 2 tall glasses of sparkling cider. Dr. Claire Hughes joined them, no longer the intimidating academic, just a friend passing the gravy. The diner was loud and happy, filled with families, but for a moment, the world seemed to shrink down to their booth. Samuel raised his glass, catching the warm yellow light of the diner. He looked at Dr. Hughes, then at Leo, whose glasses were fogged up from the steam of the potatoes. "To the truth," Samuel said softly. "And to the variables that change everything." Leo clinked his glass against his father's. "To you, Dad." The camera pans out from the warm, glowing window of the diner to the snowy street, leaving the audience with a sense that while the world outside is cold, kindness keeps the light on. As the winter snow settles over St. Ives, we are reminded that the brightest stars often shine from the shadows we ignore. True brilliance does not wear a tailored suit, nor does it shout for attention. It waits quietly in the hearts of those brave enough to see the world differently. Like Samuel and Leo, let us remember that when we wipe away the dust of prejudice, we do not just find the answer, we find each other. Tonight, take a moment to offer kindness to someone invisible in your world. It might be the variable that changes everything.